Now let's try to understand these two files in more details, HPA.YAML and RBAC.YAML. So the API version is quite clear. It defines the API version, typically autoscaling /v1 or autoscaling v2 beta 2 or whatever. And it specifies this configuration is of a horizontal pod autoscaler kind. Metadata contains the name and optional namespace for HPA. This is the name Nginx HPA. And scale target reference API version is again the API version of this resource, and it is of the kind deployment. Type of resource is deployment, and this is the name Nginx deployment. Min replicas, the minimum number of replicas the HPA will scale down to, and maximum replicas is the maximum number of replicas the HPA will horizontal pod autoscaler will scale up to. Target CPU utilization percentage is the target or average CPU utilization across the pods, which is 50. This is, I think, easy to understand. But for RBAC.YAML, and this is the purpose is, this is the kind is service account, whose purpose is it provides an identity for the processes that run in a pod. Okay. And API version is again the version of the API, and metadata, it provides metadata about the resources. So the name of the service account is my service account, and it is on a default namespace. The namespace where the service account is created is a default namespace. And for the role, the purpose is a role defines a set of permissions within a specific namespace. Now this YAML section is API version is again it specifies the API version, and kind, it defines that the kind of resource is role. Metadata provides metadata about the resource. Okay. And resources specify the resources the rule applies to, that is the pods. Okay. And in this rule, the API groups list the API groups that the rule applies to. Now, this double quotes, empty double quotes, indicates the core API group. And this resources specifies the resources that rules applies to, that is pods. And the verbs, it lists the actions that can be performed on the resources, get, watch, and list. And let's come to the role binding. The role binding grants the permissions defined in a role to a user or service account. Okay. Now this API version is again clear. The same API version specifies the API version, and kind is role binding, the kind of resource, and metadata name is read pods. Name of the role binding is read pods, and the namespace is again where the role binding is created is a default namespace. Subject specifies the subject, Subject specifies the subject, user, group, or service account to which the role is granted. So kind is the service account. So either, as I said, user, group, or service account it could be. So it is service account kind. And name of the service account is my service account, and namespace is again the default namespace. Role ref specifies the role that is being granted. Kind is the kind of resources being referenced, that is the role, and name of this role is pod reader. API group is the API group of the role. So service account acts as an identity for applications running within the pods. Now key details are default namespace. Okay, like default namespace is default, here also default. It is created in the default namespace named pod reader and allows reading get, watch, list pods. And for this is for role I was talking about. Now for role binding, this is the role binding. Now its purpose is to bind the pod reader role to my service account. Okay, and here the key details is it grants my service account in the default namespace the permissions defined in the pod reader role. Permissions defined in the pod reader role. Now this setup ensures that any pod using the my service account, service account will have read and access to the pods in the default namespace.